We have $100 million divorces. Blake's like, if one of us is getting $100 million divorce, then we're getting divorced.
For nearly a decade, Miranda Lambert said nothing. Not a word about Blake Shelton that could be clipped, quoted, or turned into a headline. While the rest of the world picked sides, wrote think pieces, and dissected every lyric she ever sang, Miranda kept her mouth shut and let the songs do the talking. That silence was not weakness. Anyone who has followed her career long enough knows that Miranda Lambert has never been weak. That silence was strategy, or maybe it was survival. Either way, it held firm through breakups, rumors, remarriage, and years of public scrutiny that would have broken most people. And then, in 2025, after nearly 10 years of carefully managed quiet, she finally opened up. What came out surprised people not because it was explosive, but because it was something far more unexpected. It was honest, it was calm, and in some ways it was even generous. To understand why that moment landed the way it did, you have to go back to the beginning. Miranda and Blake were not just two country singers who dated and split. They were a genuine institution in Nashville. They met in 2005 at a songwriting event, fell into a relationship that the entire country music world watched develop in real time, and married in May 2011 at a ranch in Boerne, Texas. For a while, they looked like the genre's great love story. Two big personalities, two serious careers, two people who seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. They performed together, appeared on each other's albums, and gave interviews where they laughed about being home buddies who would rather grill out than hit Hollywood parties. Fans adored them. Country radio played their collaborations. Award shows treated them like royalty. It felt real because for a while it probably was. But marriages are lived in private, and what happens behind closed doors rarely matches the version that gets photographed on red carpets. By 2014, Miranda was releasing songs from her album Platinum that, in retrospect, read like a diary of a relationship quietly coming apart. Tracks that dealt with loneliness, absence, and a kind of domestic grief that does not come from a single fight, but from a slow accumulation of missed moments and growing distance. At the time, most fans heard those songs as just Miranda being Miranda, emotionally raw and unflinchingly honest in the way she had always been. Looking back, the album sounds like someone writing letters to a marriage that had already started to end, even if neither person had said it out loud yet. The announcement came in July 2015, and it hit the country music world like a car crash in slow motion. Their joint statement was brief and deliberately vague. They said the split was not the future they had envisioned, that they were moving forward separately with heavy hearts. That was it. No explanation, no blame, no detail. For a couple that had been so publicly visible for so long, the silence in that statement was deafening. And because they gave the public nothing real, the public invented everything. Tabloids ran competing theories. Fans argued on social media. Rumors about cheating circulated from multiple directions, targeting both of them. The mystery of their divorce became almost as famous as the marriage itself. What happened next only added fuel to everything. Within months, Blake was photographed with Gwen Stefani, his co-star on The Voice, and by early 2016, they were openly a couple. The speed of that transition left people with questions that neither Blake nor Miranda answered directly. Blake was still wearing his wedding ring at public appearances just days before the divorce announcement. And now here he was, moving forward with someone new, while the ink on the divorce paperwork was barely dry. People did the math, and the math felt suspicious to a lot of fans who had believed in the relationship. The timing alone was enough to keep the divorce narrative alive and burning for years. Miranda, to her enormous credit, said almost nothing. She gave no revenge interviews. She did not post cryptic social media messages aimed at her ex. She did not call radio stations with a prepared statement. She turned inward, went back to her roots, and in 2016 released The Weight of These Wings, a sprawling double album that many critics and fans consider the most emotionally complete work of her career. 24 songs that moved through grief, confusion, self-destruction, and slow-building resilience. It was not a breakup album in the traditional pop sense, the kind that names names and scores points. It was something more complicated and more honest than that. It was the sound of a person trying to figure out who they are after the version of themselves they had been living inside for years suddenly stopped making sense. She told interviewers at the time that if people wanted to understand what she was feeling, they should listen to the music. That became her consistent answer for years. The music was the statement. The music was the interview. The music was the only public version of her private truth that she was willing to share, and she held that line with remarkable discipline. Even when Blake sent a tweet in April 2018, using the word karma in a post that fans immediately interpreted as a dig at Miranda amid swirling rumors about her personal life, she did not respond publicly. She let it pass. The tweet was later deleted, but screenshots have a way of living forever, and the interpretation that it was aimed at her never fully went away. Her own life continued to generate headlines that complicated the image she had built. The situation involving Evan Felker from Turnpike Troubadours in 2018 was messy and public in ways that her fans found hard to square with the persona she had constructed over years of songs about loyalty and betrayal. Reports at the time suggested the relationship had begun while both she and Felker were still committed to other people. His wife at the time, Stacey Nelson, reportedly found out about the divorce filing through a local newspaper rather than from her husband directly. The irony was not lost on anyone. Miranda Lambert, whose music had spent 15 years calling out cheaters and celebrating the women they hurt, was now on the other side of that story in the public eye. Critics called it hypocrisy. Fans who had followed her career felt genuinely confused. Miranda, again, said very little. She moved forward. Then came the announcement in February 2019 that genuinely stunned everyone. Miranda Lambert had secretly married Brendan McLaughlin, an NYPD officer she had met only about 3 months earlier, in November 2018 backstage at a Good Morning America taping where he was working security. The wedding took place on January 26th in Davidson County, Tennessee. Miranda told nobody. She announced it herself on Valentine's Day with a photograph and a caption about finding the love of her life, and the country music world collectively stopped and stared. Just months earlier, she had described herself as happily single in an interview. Now she was married. The secrecy felt deliberate. After years of having her grief dissected publicly, she had clearly decided that this piece of her life was going to belong only to her until she chose to share it. Brendan eventually left the police force and moved into her world, traveling with her on tour. Songs from her 2019 album Wildcard, particularly tracks like Bluebird, felt like evidence that something genuinely peaceful had entered her life. She spoke about him with warmth and without the guarded quality that had characterized so many of her interviews in the years following the divorce. People who watched closely said she seemed lighter, like someone who had put down something very heavy and was still getting used to the feeling of her own hands being empty. But the gossip machine does not take a holiday just because someone has found peace. In mid-2025, videos surfaced of Brendan dancing closely with women at Miranda's own Nashville bar, Casa Rosa, during a bachelorette party. The footage spread quickly across social media, and the commentary came fast and loud. Sources suggested Miranda was not present and that the situation caused a real confrontation between them. Brendan's side maintained it was harmless fun, that the women recognized him and wanted photos. But the symbolism of it happening in a bar with her name attached made the story linger longer than it might have otherwise. No divorce filing followed, but the episode reminded people, and perhaps Miranda herself, that privacy is fragile and public life has a way of pulling at the edges of even the most carefully protected moments. And then, in 2025, something shifted in the way Miranda talked about the past. In an interview that circulated widely, she spoke about Blake Shelton with a directness and a calm that she had never publicly offered before. She said she had let go of the bitterness. After years of carrying the weight of that divorce, years of channeling the pain into music without ever actually naming it out loud in an interview, she said she had reached a point where she was no longer interested in holding on to the anger. She did not say Blake was blameless. She did not pretend the marriage ending had been simple or clean. But she spoke about the experience as something she had processed, moved through, and come out the other side of as a fuller person. That moment was significant not because of any specific revelation she made, but because of what it represented in the context of everything that came before it. This was a woman who had spent roughly 10 years refusing to let the public version of her divorce define her, refusing to give media outlets the explosive soundbite they were looking for, refusing to be the weeping ex-wife or the furious scorned woman, even as she was sometimes painted as one or the other depending on the news cycle. And now here she was, saying plainly that she had done the internal work, had carried the grief through its full weight, and had come out on the other side without the bitterness she once held. In a podcast clip from 2024 that resurfaced around the same time, she laughed when Blake's name came up. Not the brittle laugh of someone performing indifference, but something that sounded genuinely unguarded. Laughter is one of the more honest responses a person can have, and it reads differently than a careful interview answer. It reads like someone who is actually okay. Not performing okay, not strategically positioning themselves as okay for public relations purposes, but genuinely, privately okay in a way that just shows in the muscles of their face. What Miranda Lambert has done over the course of her career is something that very few public figures manage. She has consistently used her music as the primary vehicle for her truth while keeping her actual interior life protected. The songs have always been honest, sometimes brutally so, but the person singing them has remained, in key ways, genuinely private. She has never given a tearful tell-all interview. She has never used a late-night appearance to get revenge on an ex. She has never positioned herself as a victim in a way that invited public sympathy at someone else's direct expense. Even when rumors swirled around her behavior, she took the hit publicly without mounting an aggressive public defense. That is an unusual kind of discipline in an industry and an era that rewards oversharing. The music tells the real story, which is why it has connected with so many people over so many years. She wrote about betrayal because she grew up watching it happen in other people's marriages through the lens of her parents' private investigation work. She wrote about resilience because she watched her family lose nearly everything and rebuild with their own hands. She wrote about anger because she learned early that anger, properly directed, is not a problem to be managed, but an energy to be used. And she wrote about love, complicated, imperfect, sometimes ruinous love, because she lived it. By 2025, the chapter that began with Blake Shelton seemed, at last, to be genuinely closed. Not in the way that a door gets slammed in an argument, but in the way that a wound finally finishes healing. The scar is there. The shape of the story is still visible in the catalog of work she produced during and after those years. But the infection is gone. The daily pain has passed. What remains is simply the evidence that she went through something enormous and came through it as herself, which is, when you look at the full arc of her life, exactly what Miranda Lambert has always done. She came through a childhood full of other people's secrets and turned it into a perspective. She came through a Nashville industry that tried to reshape her and turned resistance into a career. She came through a public divorce that the entire world had opinions about and turned the silence into some of the most emotionally resonant music country has produced in the last 20 years. And now she has come through the bitterness itself, said so plainly and without theater, and moved on. That is the full sentence she finally finished in 2025. Not a dramatic reveal, not a bombshell confession, but something quieter and harder to achieve. The simple, honest statement that she is no longer angry, that she has let it go, that the story with Blake Shelton, whatever it really was behind closed doors, belongs to the past now, and she is done carrying it into the present. For someone who has spent her entire public life turning private pain into art, that kind of peace might just be the most radical thing she has ever said out loud.